My favourite colour is bright pink.
I'm Stephen Campbell, and I'm talking to you from the Puzzle Factory, which is my oil painting studio in Salford. This painting is called 22nd of February 2022. It's a palindrome, the same forwards and backwards. I've used different palindromic numbers in different bases, which may seem like an overcomplicated way of exploring a spectrum and a different kind of space, but it takes us on a journey through this colour spectrum and into infinity. Behind closed doors, the interior of a nightclub toilet in Manchester. At the Puzzle Factory, we look at art and science not as separate realms, but if we look at colours more as the frequencies that the light is hitting our eyes at, and the frequencies of light that it absorbs, we can approach colour with new meaning and new understanding to recreate and capture the world that we live in.
Bright pink.
If you've ever tried to make paint in your art class, and your art teacher says, why don't you mix a bit of red and a bit of white, you're not going to get the lovely bright pinks of Barbie. We're going to end up with a sort of light red. What's interesting about pink, magenta, is that it reflects light from the longer end of the spectrum and the shorter frequency end of the spectrum. So it would reflect violets. If you're going and venturing off with your primary colours, you might want to add a bit of blue to try and get a bit of those violets, but more often than not, you're going to end up with a very grey purple. Our story about magenta starts 3,140 odd years ago with Tutankhamun, the gold-faced man. He was buried with some robes dyed bright pink from the madder plant, Rubia tinctorum. This has been the traditional way of getting the pink dye through ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, from the Roman Empire, and all around the Mediterranean, where it flourished in Persia. The other major dye at this time was Murex purple, discovered by none other than Hercules' dog. This dye was so special that if you wore it under Emperor Nero, you would be punished by death. This demand for bright pink was becoming greater and greater, and the secrecy of the alchemical processes involved. And we have many of these preserved by the great Caterina Sforza. She had a collection called the Glis Experimentis of hundreds of recipes, from treatments for erectile dysfunction to homemade abortions to hair removal cream to the use of madder in lipstick and cosmetics, keeping herself absolutely stunning. As we go towards the end, past the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, around the 18th century, 1736, Joshua Ward develops this process for making sulfuric acid at industrial scales, and the chemical industry takes off. 1776, the height of the Scottish Enlightenment, and scientists are starting to publish their findings and share their secrets with the academic world. 1794, the end of the Reign of Terror, this chap DuPont, his family involved as publishers during the French Revolution, they flee to America and capitalize on gunpowder. Our first little black powder that we come across in this story. DuPont corners the explosives market and benefits from all the activity going on in America at the time. George Field is discovering his experiments with madder. He's publishing the fact that you need to use alum and alkali solutions to keep the dye into the fabric as a mordant. This was already known by the alchemists and in ancient Egypt. We know this through Mrs. Merrifield, who collated lots of recipes from the Middle Ages. This brings us to our first pigment, alizarin. This was isolated from the madder plant in 1826 by Robiquet and Chevreuil. If we have a little look at it, it gives this lovely rosy hue. And as a paint, it is quite translucent and will bring portraiture to life. However, the difference between a true pigment and a dye is that typically the dye is an organic compound which would break down under ultraviolet light, making a lot of these living paintings turning into ghosts. If you take a frog and pop it in a jar of alizarin solution, the chemical reacts with the calcium deposits, turning its bones bright red and its soft tissue transparent. Now the chemistry is coming into its own, and an 18-year-old man called William Perkin, while experimenting with coal tar, discovers aniline dyes, mauve. He decides, do I want a career in academia or do I want to make a fortune selling pink and purple? He makes his fortune by the age of 23 with the colour mauve, which he patents in 1856. This patent, however, did not hold up in France. So you have these other chemists, Francois Vargan, who starts his own experiments, and he finds a similar colour, more onto our pinky spectrum, and calls it Fuchsine, named after the fuchsia flower. He also wastes no time in making his fortune and starts selling his dye to the military. The craze for pink was catapulted by Princess Eugenie, who claimed it matched her eyes. She was the wife of Napoleon III. This fuchsine was used to colour the uniforms of the French Sardinian army as they battled in Magenta, now modern-day Italy. Now, the difficulty with this magenta is keeping it light-fast and water-fast. So when you wash your clothes, it doesn't all disappear. Where are we? Perkins' method was to use mercuric nitrate. Now, if you ever tried mercury, you should just stay away from it. Just don't touch it. It's not the best thing to use in your clothes. As all this money is being thrown into the chemical industries, there's all this competition. What's the cheapest, most quickest way to maintain this light fastness? Arsenic acid. So people are dressing in the highest fashion, bright pink, and poisoning everyone around them. And all these dye manufacturers in the UK are taking off. However, they're kept out of the south, and the government does not particularly want to get involved in chemistry. Not so in Germany, where the government is funding it. Just kill our people left, right, and centre, you know. The price of this bright pink is falling from £5 a gallon to £3 a gallon. All vast countrysides have been growing the madder plant. How are they going to compete with this pink made out of coal tar, a byproduct? They don't. And in 1871, the madder market collapses. However, not so in Persia, where they were wise enough to protect themselves from these toxic pinks everywhere else and did not want to bring down the quality of their Persian carpet.
Bright pink.
1896, Poland enters the fray. Niementowski discovers the compound quinacridin, or as it's become to be known, quinacridone, and is the key compound for producing the lovely bright pink Quindo Red PR122. If we compare it to the frequencies of light it reflects compared to the alizarin, the alizarin is reflecting mainly lower frequencies, giving us the red, and a little bit of the higher frequency violet, and absorbing this much of the green light. 1935, Lieberman publishes his research on quinacridone, which is picked up by DuPont and their chemist W. Struve. As DuPont have capitalised on people exploding, the lack of pollution regulation, the car industry at this point is booming. However, pink cars coloured with alizarin will break down under ultraviolet light and will fade over time. DuPont markets the colour quinacridone magenta 1958 as the light-fast solution to this pink problem. It reflects a higher amount of the high-frequency wavelength, as well as these lower frequency reds, and absorbing a much greater amount of this green light, giving it this vibrant colour that stimulates multiple light receptors in our eyes. The different isomers that quinacridone forms will create different structures in the chemical surface, where linear structures will reflect more of the yellow light, and the lattice structure reflecting more of this pink and these violets. In 1984, though, we're still using Fuchsine in food additives. The aniline dyes have taken off and given us so much help to pick out different properties of cells, and has led to treatment in HIV amongst other diseases. The production of quinacridone is an expensive pigment. Today it's around £200 per kilogram, which is more than 3 times the price of white titanium dioxide. 2001, the production of quinacridone gold ceased. Why would you produce this expensive pigment that will make a colour you've already got? 2014, Vanta Black, the blackest of blacks that absorbs all the light, is introduced, and the artist Anish Kapoor claims complete control over it. This provokes the artist Stuart Semple to develop on his own version of bright pink, the pinkiest of pinks. If we have a look and compare the brightness of this, we can see it fluoresce under our daylight, and we see it reflecting another range of these waves of light. Unfortunately, however, we know this not to be as light fast as our pigment quinacridone PR122. This specific pigment being the choice for the puzzle factory. Where we are now in our decade, we've got the Barbie movie 2023, and using the colour pink in its marketing campaigns, claiming there's a massive lack of the colour pink, or there's great demand globally for the colour pink. And finally, 2026, the World Cup, the star of the World Cup being the pink football boot. If I had been allowed to wear pink football boots as a child, perhaps I'd actually play football. But our story doesn't end there, as the silk dyers in Macclesfield are taking us all the way back to ancient Egypt and reintroducing the natural colour madder in their fabric dyes. So we see that the colour pink has taken us from just dyeing fabrics, dyeing bones, cosmetics. It's used in aniline dyes to isolate different diseases. It's poisoning us with knickers in the Victorian age, collapsing industries, killing people left, right and centre to allow us to enjoy the beauty of this colour. Thank you very much.
My favourite colour is bright pink.